For this video, I wanted to put a bit of a spotlight onto Bella Ramsey since she's doing a great job in The Last of Us, and I wanted to go back and analyze what she did so well as Lyanna Mormont. Initially, she was supposed to be a one-off character, and somehow, she was able to convince David and Dan to give her more scenes, and even a major one at the end of Season 6, along with becoming a recurring character afterwards. This is a rare feat in shows, and essentially means that the actor was so good to the point that they changed the minds of the writers. Another example of this was Jesse Pinkman in Breaking Bad. Jesse was supposed to die in Season 1, but Vince Gilligan was convinced through Aaron's performance that there was something missing within the show. From there, he became an integral character and even ended up getting his own spin-off movie. Now, even though Lyanna Mormont isn't as important as Jesse was, Game of Thrones is an inherently big show with dozens of characters, so it could have been really easy for David and Dan to have dropped her, and there wouldn't have been a major impact. So that means that she'd have to be even more impressive to push past any potential competition for screen time. For Lyanna Mormont, let's identify the core internal and external reasons as to why she turned out to be such a good character. Starting out with the internal factor, we have the performance of Bella Ramsey. Game of Thrones has had some amazing child actors, and I won't go so far to say that Bella Ramsey is the best, but I think she stands out because of how well she fits into the mold of Lyanna's badass persona. It's really hard for a child to command this much respect and to be this bold, and it could have easily have not worked. That's why to me she's so distinct, and must be why David and Dan wanted to extend her presence within the show. But let's look specifically at what Bella Ramsey does to achieve this. Acting-wise, what sticks out the most is her usage of inflection and the volume of her voice.
Lord Kerwin, your father was skinned alive by Ramsay Bolton. Still, you refuse the call.
She intentionally puts a lot of emphasis on certain words to further punctuate a character beat, along with using this louder shift in volume to be more commanding and to stand above the other characters who are more hesitant to speak louder. It erupts her onto the scene where she breaks the tradition of making a bit of small talk and cutting to the chase with why they are there. I think a clever thing that Brian Cogman does with the script was having Lyanna interrupt characters on multiple occasions when she starts talking.
What you have to understand, my lady, is that...
I understand that I'm responsible for Bear Island and all who live here. So why should I sacrifice one more Mormont life for someone else's war?
It creates this brief moment that catches the characters off guard and immediately establishes that we are playing by Lyanna's rules. She's essentially in charge of this scene. Another small moment that geniusly sets up a more independent and intelligent characteristic for Lyanna is the fact that she chooses to confide in her maester for information, but the second he approaches her without approval, she waves him off. Just a very efficient bit of writing, and to be honest, this is one of those rare, well-written scenes of the later seasons. Then, there are even some instances of subtle cinematography that aid the notion that Lyanna is in charge. For this shot, the composition places John on the right side of the frame, and there's a lot of space behind him. Since there is barely any room ahead of him, it gives off a claustrophobic presence in front of him, and it feels like he's talking into a wall, or there being opposition ahead of him. This breaks the normal shot composition of having leading room ahead of someone talking. And then the shot after this, where it cuts to a close-up of John as he's speaking, we assume that we are going to stay on the shot for a while, but we don't when Lyanna interrupts him and we quickly cut away. So between these two shots, we break tradition in footage to establish Lyanna as being in control. Now, I said I was going to talk specifically about Bella Ramsey's acting, but I think it's important to point out the other aspects of production that aid her in this scene. It all comes together to make a strong introduction for her character. This scene may not require a ton of range emotionally from Bella Ramsey, but that doesn't mean she's incapable, as especially shown in The Last of Us, where she goes through an entire gambit of emotions that she effortlessly breezes through. She perfectly does the task she was given in Game of Thrones, and if anything, does an even better job than what was expected. She doesn't come off as trying too hard to be intimidating, and her attitude in this scene is smart and calculated.
As far as I understand, you're a Snow, and Lady Sandra is a Bolton. Who's she a Lannister? I've heard conflicting reports.
She's not being overly emotional, and it feels like everything she's saying has purpose. And even though she's interrupting characters, it never comes across as that disrespectful, because she's normally the one prioritizing what should be discussed in the conversation, and is smart enough to see that this attempt at small talk is futile. Looking at her final scene of season 6, she gives a rousing speech that leads into the climax of Jon's entire season arc. Like, that's honestly an insane upgrade from being a one-off character to one that has to build up the hype to announce Jon Snow as being King of the North. And I think she nails this scene really well. Again, her usage of inflection is very particular and detailed, but I also love how she pauses between some of her lines. It creates a sense of dramatic buildup for her delivery to have even more of a punch when she's calling out different lords for not showing up to the Battle of the Bastards.
You swore allegiance to House Stark, Lord Glover. But in their hour of greatest need, you refused the call.
Then the writing aids her acting because she's able to escalate a recurring phrase throughout the scene. It's as if she's embodying a viper as she strikes down each one of her victims, and then she caps off the moment with a triumphant approval of Jon Snow. In season 8, we have the mirror of this scene, which is kind of a nice moment, but it feels a little cheap that David and Dan are essentially copying this moment from season 6, but it's in reverse. Along with it being pretty unreasonable that the North is mad at him for leaving temporarily to get reinforcements to fight the Night King, which was completely necessary, but going into all that would be getting off topic. Bella Ramsey's acting has well-timed character beats, is able to captivate an entire room of people with her commanding voice, and she's able to come across as simultaneously intelligent and giving off a crazy amount of confidence that really shouldn't be possible for a child to portray. And the fact that a child actor is able to achieve all of this and so much more is extremely impressive. So I think she perfectly executes the character Lyanna Mormont from an acting standpoint. Looking at the more external reasons for why Lyanna Mormont is a good character, there are quite a few. Firstly, I think one of the most important factors is that she symbolizes what the later seasons lack so much, which are more new characters. David and Dan in general for the later seasons wanted to minimize new characters and focused primarily on the pre-existing ones. Instead of committing to a 10-season goal that George and HBO wanted, David and Dan opted to rush through the finish line with 8 seasons that were also shortened. An example of them not introducing new characters is them reducing plotlines in Dorne and the Iron Islands. For those two areas, there were much bigger conflicts within the books that also brought about more characters. Like, it would have been much cooler if we saw more Greyjoys in the Iron Islands that Euron could kill to make him more intimidating. This all highlights a core issue within the later seasons of Game of Thrones in which, instead of retaining the big scale of Westeros, David and Dan subtly reduced it by not making more additions. So this makes the inclusion and high quality of Lyanna Mormont that much more important because she's a representation of the expansion within the world that should have been more abundant. From the characters they did add, Lyanna Mormont is the best in my opinion. Now, you'd think that wouldn't be the case, but try to think about what new characters David and Dan added in seasons 6, 7, and 8 who were better. You basically just have Euron Greyjoy, Lady Crane, Randall Tarley, Dickon Tarley, Archmaester Ebros, Robert Glover, and the most important character, Captain Strickland. Between these characters, the only one that really stands out is Randall Tarley, and you can make the case for liking him more than Lyanna because of his complicated relationship with Samwell, but I still like Lyanna more because she has more to offer in comparison. Lyanna is essentially a gateway into us seeing more of the world of Westeros. We've never been to Bear Island before, and House Mormont is pretty important considering that Ser Jorah and Jorah Mormont play big roles in the overall story. This is the content that should be elaborated on. Show us more northern houses and flesh everyone out, especially on each side of the coin. Because looking at the Battle of the Bastards, Jon Umber and Harold Karstark were basically background characters who had minuscule character work. It's just wild to me that Lyanna Mormont is one of the only new characters that has tangible personality traits and is tied in with the plot. Like, even Lord Glover, who I thought had some good scenes in season 6, ended up getting tossed into the bin for season 8. He apparently doesn't show up, and there are no consequences for that since it's never revisited. Unless if the Night King attacked him first, but if the Night King hit every northern kingdom north of Winterfell, then that would have taken ages. So it sucks how David and Dan are shrinking the size of the cast, and Robert Glover could have easily been a character to pad out the deaths for the Long Night. When you look at the earlier seasons of the show, you had a much better roster of characters, and they also made massive decisions that affected the story. An example being Rickard Karstark murdering some Lannister boys that then prompted Robb Stark to execute him, which then alienated the Karstark army. And that even leads leads into Robb Stark having to stoop so low as to ask help from the Freys. Like, would you look at that? Characters making big choices that drastically impact what happens. Lyanna doesn't really have any major decisions and is mostly along for the ride, but at least her character achieves the bare minimum for some form of representation of the North. She's entertaining not just because of Bella Ramsey's captivating performance, but because it gives you a small ounce of expansion for the North. If we had her and like 3 other prominent Northern lords, then hey, maybe we'd be able to have more engaging dialogue scenes within Winterfell, similar to the scene where Lyanna is talking to Ser Jorah Mormont. Another reason why Bella Ramsey works so well as Lyanna Mormont was the irony of her stature, power, bravery, and pure big balls as a kid. In comparison to the other grizzled and battle-hardened characters of the North, she blew them away in terms of her childlike energy. It made her shutting down these seemingly tough individuals that much more satisfying and boosted her up as being more likable. It basically set her character up as being inherently entertaining from a writing standpoint, and then Bella Ramsey took that character and brought it to life with great expertise. And I also love how she's not afraid to get her hands dirty and wants to become a warrior. It further gives off an angle of feministic empowerment, because if this little girl is ready to fight and isn't scared, then surely you should not be. It's also interesting how David and Dan made a more obvious version of this notion, with this random extra girl wanting to fight after this guy was scared to fight. It kind of bashes this message into your face, and I think it worked perfectly well through Lyanna Mormont as a character, and they didn't need to spell it out for the audience. Not to mention, this girl doesn't show up again. So this feels like a deleted scene, and the point they're making here is made very clear in the next episode through Lyanna Mormont taking down a giant. Lyanna has one of the most badass death scenes in the entire show because of this. And this is really the only good moment in the entirety of The Long Night, because it's the irony of the smallest character bringing down the biggest opponent on the battlefield. Although, it's questionable as to why this giant would pick up Lyanna and stare at her like this. But whatever, it makes for a good moment if you don't question anything. So, in essence, I think her character is inherently likable because of how much she embodies a warrior, which is also a common trend in Game of Thrones, like through Brienne of Tarth and Arya Stark. However, it's just as commendable in Lyanna because of how much younger she is. For the last external factor that benefits Lyanna Mormont, she offers a good contrast in comparison to the other child characters. For those child characters, we have Joffrey, who is a mad and unhinged brat, Sansa, who is in constant turmoil, and very slowly over time learns the nature of politicking. Bran was a curious adventurer, turned into a depressed child who finally finds purpose in life. Arya, who is similar to Lyanna in that she wants to be a warrior, but she has a gaping hole in her heart as she looks for people to bond to. Lyanna is the most adult-like child out of this bunch, and seeing these qualities within a child is rare, making her leadership qualities and other confident aspects tied to her character that much more fun to watch. She doesn't feel like a redundant character because of this, and she is able to offer a unique perspective in the already massive world of Game of Thrones. To me, Lyanna Mormont is one of the only new characters past Season 5 that isn't written poorly. The fact that Bella Ramsey was able to succeed so well at being a compelling and mature kid who comes across as a leader was impressive. I'll also do a video on Oberyn Martell since Pedro Pascal also happens to be in The Last of Us. In hindsight, I probably should have started with him since he's a more popular character, but I'll get to it. Thank you for watching as always and have a good day.